The retirement models have always been wrong, always. And yet we hold them up in some golden throne of from Zeus. These are the raw models that work. And it's just they're wrong, dude. And I don't get why we still follow something that's wrong if we know it's just incorrect. I'll get into it a little bit here in just a second. It's just so frustrating. And they say, well, our models are wrong, but your models don't exist. And thus, we're going to use our models even if they're wrong because your models don't exist. Like, but anyway, so let me give you an example. This kind of reminds me of, I show what I'm looking at right here. We're going to look at this life cycle model of consumption and saving from Martin Browning and Thomas Crossley from the Journal of Economic Perspectives in 2001. And the reason I like to use these articles, the old timers, because they have the footnotes and stuff. You see what I'm saying? Lots of footnotes, which is just so much stuff you can read on. And I freaking love it, dude. I love it. I print them off, I highlight and all that stuff. And I'm just going to go over where these guys say, we've been there's been a lot of inconsistency in retirement spending models. And how do you account for that? And yet the theories are always perfect and the reality is different. It's kind of like the whole argument about tariffs. Of course, economists will all say tariffs are bad. They'll say anytime you put a tax on something makes it more expensive, thus inflationary, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, well, that makes sense in their theory, but the reality is that's not how it transpired when you actually had the reality to look at it with your own very eyes. And I still hear on my YouTube channel, well, the economists, 95%. It's okay, they're wrong. They're just wrong. Doesn't mean they can't be right. But again, you can't say because X, thus Y. You just can't say that. And I'll just give an example of Feynman, kind of goes back to what Feynman said right here. It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with the experiment, it is wrong. It is wrong. That's Richard Feynman, and I find that very interesting. I kept those jokes back there. It also makes me want to go back to Mandelbrot right here, Benoit Mandelbrot, who says in his book, The Misbehavior of Markets, kind of challenging the Markowitz theory of a modern efficient frontier was MPT. Anyway, Harry Markowitz, off the top of my head, I can't remember, efficient market theory or modern portfolio theory. Because right here, Markowitz and others transformed investing from a game of stock tips and hunches to an engineering of means, variances, and risk aversion indices. In fact, the term financial engineering has been popular on Wall Street ever since. All right, so there are problems, of course, with Markowitz, because as Markowitz himself pointed out, it is not certain that using a bell curve is the best way to measure stock market risk. It's easy, but not necessarily right. Ding, ding, ding for all the anti-tariff people. Yeah, it might sound good in theory, but doesn't mean it's right. To build an efficient portfolio, you need good forecasts of earnings, share prices, and volatility for thousands of stocks. Otherwise, garbage in and garbage out. Finally, for each stock, you must laboriously calculate its covariance with or how it fluctuates against every other stock. For a 30-stock portfolio, about the minimum needed to make the numbers work well, that means 495 calculations of mean, variance, and covariance. And for the entire New York Stock Exchange, 3.9 million calculations. And because prices change minute by minute, the exercise needs constant repetition. All right, so basically, that is the efficient market, frontier. Right? Whatever. That says it doesn't make any sense because A, we don't even know the variances. We don't know, and we can look at 17 as a standard deviation, so that works until it doesn't, and that's the misbehavior of markets. But it gets even worse when it comes to financial retirement planning, because the life cycle model of consumption and spending I actually like quite a bit. Because it says basically you're going to adjust your spending to your current situation in the various life cycles. All right. But the problem with the 4% rule doesn't do that. The 4% rule or any other financial retirement rule says you're going to spend each and every year with inflation. And yet the life cycle model, as suspect as it is, we have absolute evidence that doesn't happen. In fact, you're going to see right here in this graph, right? I'm going to show you right here. Hold on, my friends. Hold on, right here. Life cycle patterns of income and consumption. Consumption is down here, income is up there. Notice they follow. Here you are 30, here you are basically 59, 58. Your consumption goes up and then it goes down. Your income goes up and then it goes down. The 4% rule would say your income goes down, but the consumption keeps going up with inflation. And it's just not, there's just no evidence of this at all, man. It's just none. And yet all the financial gurus react like you're insane if you say anything different. So again, the consumption model says, "Sheeps, go like that," while your income model goes just like this the other way around. It's just not true. I mean, again, that doesn't mean it can't be, but it's just not true. So we're going to go to a page here. I want to show you something here. These two guys, Browning and Edgenaries, whatever his name is, find that consumption tracks income even for households that start off with significant assets, would make one skeptical of the liquidity constraint of prudence explanation. So basically what he's saying is, some people say the reason people are spending changes is because they have less money available to spend. They're liquidity constrained. And yet Browning, that other guy, says, well, that's just not true. Consumption tracks income. Consumption tracks income. Interesting. Let's keep going. A first pass at the data would suggest that households fail to smooth consumption across the retirement threshold. That is, consumption appears to fall with retirement. Interesting. A careful reading of the literature, however, suggests that the dust certainly has not settled on whether many households arrive at retirement with assets that are too low to maintain material living standards. We don't know. A crucial issue may be whether one counts financial health or financial wealth, or whether one tries instead to measure a broader notion of wealth, including wealth held in housing and entitlements to Social Security and occupational pensions. Interesting. Thus, if heterogeneity in discount range underlies the observed heterogeneity in retirement wealth, then pre-retirement consumption growth rates should be correlated with retirement wealth levels. But this does not appear to be the case. Using life cycle models to explain the observed fall of consumption at retirement, the basic insight is that households experience a number of changes around retirement, you think? Including lower labor supply, greater mortality risk, smaller family size, and reduced health status. Some of these factors will reduce household consumption directly, for example, through lower costs of going to work or smaller family size. These factors can reduce the marginal utility of consumption. The marginal utility of consumption, i.e., you get less benefit for every extra piece of bread you ate. All right, so for instance, I just got done making some sourdough bread. The first freaking piece of bread just is legendary. Second piece of bread is still legendary. Third piece of bread, not quite. And the fourth piece of bread, I got just to save it. My marginal consumption, my marginal utility for consumption drops drastically after I have 2 or 3 pieces of bread, even though sourdough bread is still crushing. I just don't feel like it right now because I just stuffed my face with it, which is why I got to go get on the treadmill and burn off those carbs. That's the issue when it comes to retirement planning. The marginal utility of consumption drops as we get older. That's what makes the retirement models previous so horrible. But even life cycle models, how do you measure that? How do you measure that? How do you measure your retirement marginal utility from mine? You just can't. But we see it across the board. People's marginal consumption, utility for consumption is dropping like a brick in water, which means they're just not that interested in spending. And the retirement models that show you otherwise just thrown out. Kind of like you got to throw a Martin portfolio theory and efficient market hypothesis. Because, I mean, it sounds good in theory, but when it comes to specifics, there's no evidence to support this stuff, that this is what we should be planning on in the future. Because we could just say Mandelbrot. You take 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations, 3 standard deviations. We'd never had what we had in 2008. Never mind umpteenth times of Dow. I mean, hell, the Dow was down, 3,000 points or something like that the last couple of days. They just wouldn't fall under the black swan. The black swan stuff. But these black swans happen all the time. Banks, Blundell, and Tanner assessed a degree of smoothing across the retirement house threshold while controlling for many of the factors listed. They find that the changes in household size, composition, mortality risk, and labor supply can explain a decline of about 2 percentage points of consumption at retirement. Again, decline in consumption at retirement. However, actual consumption in retirement falls by some 3 percentage points. This additional fall in consumption does appear to provide an important challenge to the life cycle framework. And interestingly, the unexplained dip in consumption growth is only in the years immediately around retirement. Yeah. So what does that mean? We don't know. Finally, we turn to the post-retirement stage of the life cycle. Many authors view dissaving after retirement as an acid test of the life cycle model. I'm not even here to bash the life cycle model because I think it's all these models are kind of the same thing in retirement planning. So they're saying dissavings. So basically what happens, you save, then you hit retirement, you spend, and you're dissaving. You're spending down your savings. You're not proactively, you're not adding to your savings, you're dissaving, you're spending it down. Right? And that would be the acid test of the life cycle model. The empirical evidence seems to be that the elderly do not dissave as much as predicted. Some savings in retirement may be attributed to a risk of a longer lifespan than expected or a risk of large medical expenses. Nevertheless, simulations suggest that even the combination of the risk cannot explain the slow rate of dissaving that is observed in the data. A bequest motive might be another possible explanation. However, our man Michael Hurd here reports that the elderly persons living with children actually save less than those who don't have children. This would seem to undermine the explanation for post-retirement saving, which is a focus on a bequest motive. All right, so what's the point about this? The point is just, once again, man, I mean, the issue is the models are just wrong. They're just wrong. And again, that doesn't mean they can't be right, but it's just like planning your retirement around the 4% rule or around some kind of consumption smoothing life cycle model. If you're not using your marginal utility to spend, is that growing or declining? And I can almost guarantee you it's going to decline, which is why your consumption goes down. And then we know too that your consumption keeps up with income until it doesn't. At some point, most retirees, when they hit a certain age, they don't even spend their income because they have no marginal utility of it continuing to consume. When does that hit? Well, it looks like the evidence is in the early 70s, frankly. That's why I keep saying you got this 10-year time frame, man. Basically 62 to 72 or something like that, to really get out there and make it happen. And after that, you're just not doing it as much, even if you got the money to do it. Yeah, this goes back to 2001, and we got data. There's a guy who had written in 1969. I want to read his article because it's been going back for a long, long time. And yet, am I the only guy talking about this? It's crazy. All right, God bless. Love your thoughts. Smash that like button. We'll see you.